Karanasan mo po, hindi na ba nakasalanan ng dito?
Media educators and learners called to become press freedom.
This corruption in media won't be reduced to
Good evening. You're watching News Cafe on the Solar News Channel. Joining us today are the editors-in-chief of the top university's official student publications, a fourth-year student of film, minoring in philosophy at the Ateneo de Manila University, Apa Agbayani for the Guidon, and also with us a graduating student of the De La Salle University taking up a BS degree in Applied Corporate Management, John Stephen Batalla for the La Sallian. And joining us are John and Apa. Hi guys, thanks for coming. What's a campus paper like today?
Well, what's interesting about campus journalism nowadays is the entry of social media. And that's not just true for campus journalism, but for journalism in general. And social media allows us to bring out our stories faster and allows our readers to respond very quickly.
Yeah, it makes our assessment of whether or not a reader actually participates and whatever impact we might have on how they think, how they perceive things. Campus media, that broader facet of campus publication, is what makes the playing field for campus journalists very much different as compared to, say, 10 years ago when editorial boards didn't have any idea as to whether or not they actually made an impact, and they would make assumptions as to whether or not students were apathetic or if they even actually mattered. Today we can measure it very easily thanks to social media.
Has it changed the way you write?
I think so, yes.
In what way?
It makes, well, we have to be more careful as regards fact checking because because of like Twitter and Facebook, everybody becomes a fact checker and everybody will point out the flaws in your writing. So I think journalists nowadays are a little more careful.
Yeah,
In terms of subject?
I'd say that we're allowed to be more events-based in our online outlets because since we can put it out right away, it doesn't become stale.
John, do people read the paper?
I'd like to think that people actually read the paper. We have
Yeah, but do you know if they read the paper?
we can measure.
How?
Well, of course, when you walk around campus, you see people reading the paper. People actually notice the differences between what we release online and what we release on print. And they let us know. They send letters, emails, and we're thankful that our print version still maintains its value despite the onset of online media. We try to make sure that we add value to whatever we release on print, that whatever is online isn't necessarily available for print, so people know what to look forward to.
What's the role of a campus paper?
Well, I'd like to think that the role of a campus paper is to impart information in a balanced manner using research. It offers students the chance to bring out an important perspective that might not be communicated in a university's official newsletter or say by the student government. It strives for independence where it should be independent.
Let's get back to that. Yes. Paper. What's a paper?
Well, it tells the stories that matter to students, and because we're not beholden to anyone, as an alternative media outlet, we're allowed to be independent, and we're allowed to we're allowed to tell those stories.
You're not beholden to the school.
No.
We're beholden to the students. We're beholden to the university. We try to write what we think the students and the rest of the university should know. We try to present an angle. We try to present fact. But we are in no way, we're not constricted by our school's administration.
Did you ever get in trouble with the school?
No.
Because of what you write?
No, never.
Why not?
We're just.
What's the most controversial story you did, John?
Usually when you start to bring up issues regarding how administration manages things. For us, the student body is also very much involved in as you say, controversy in the paper, because we have a very active student government. There's a lot of politics. And when we release opinions on how political parties in our school deal with certain issues, it becomes very noisy. A year ago, there was this issue among campus publications.
What issue?
Are we talking about
Yeah,
the editorial of the Varsitarian about the 160 Ateneo professors who signed
Right.
the statement
Okay.
for the RH bill?
All right.
it brought a lot of attention to campus publications during that time, because even if we were not the direct stakeholders involved in that issue, we were expected to come up with a statement. There was pressure from the public for campus publications to let themselves be heard on that particular national issue.
Did you?
Yes, both
Both
of
our
us did.
publications
Yes.
released
Yeah.
a
What
statement.
did you say? What was your stand?
We said that while we do respect their opinion, we felt that the editorial presented their opinion disrespectfully, and we find that there are ways to present your opinion in a way that doesn't completely lambast the other side.
Who does the editorial and who does the news in your paper?
In our paper, the editorial board is responsible for coming up with the editorial. That doesn't mean that we don't participate in the news writing. We also participate in the coverage of stories, but more or less we just take on a leadership role. We guide our writers so that they're the ones who are able to feed the information.
How about for Ateneo?
It goes the same way. The editorial board handles the editorials, and news is usually done by our writers, our staff writers.
How many reporters do you have? Writers?
More or less, all the writing sections combined, we have around 40 writing staff.
Okay. How about
Maybe
for
around
Ateneo?
60.
Dami, ah. How do you deal with subjects about religion, for example?
Well, we've written about how the university handles religion in terms of its theology class, in terms of religious freedom, and we try to approach it in as much an objective manner as possible. We stick to facts. We try to avoid opinions about that.
Okay. What do you think about media nowadays, in general?
I feel that we're breaking the dichotomy between media producers and media consumers, such that media consumers are now able to have an equal opportunity to tell the stories. So blogs can get as much circulation as, let's say, a news article. And because of that break, I think news publications and journalists have been crowdsourcing more. Like, so you can really get a feel of your readership, and you can start a conversation.
Are you talking about journalism, or are you just talking about the pulse of the people?
I'm talking about how journalism can measure that pulse.
All right. How about you?
I like to agree with Appa. I think that more or less it's easier to source content from the public that we actually engage with, and we're able to tell consumer preference more easily, given the fact that we can interact with the public. We have our own social media presence, and we're very much engaged in that.
How do you relate campus journalism to mainstream journalism, Appa?
Like I said, campus journalists are more free to tell stories, and campus journalists, although campus journalists would definitely be more focused within their universities.
Right.
While of course we have a section that handles international and national news.
How about you, John?
Well, related to mainstream journalism, I'd like to say that perhaps the experience of campus journalists in campus would serve as a sort of contrast to whatever might be experienced in the mainstream, in the work of mainstream journalists. We try to present perspectives that might not necessarily be considered mainstream. We engage in critical thinking, and we hope that the staff that we produce, so that they might be future journalists someday, could carry that with them when they go off to become professional journalists.
All right. John, Appa, and I will be back in News Cafe. Don't go away. Guys, what can you say about mainstream media, newspapers, for example? John.
I'd like to think that newspapers are trying to adapt with what the public wants to know. They're taking these extra steps that we're trying to emulate in our own campus publication. They're expanding into other forms of media, and we think that it's a welcome response, given that a lot of publications, international, might have already shifted completely to online platforms, right?
Yes, I do agree. That was a very important point of discussion for us in the guide on. After Newsweek went online entirely, we thought, okay, is this ever going to happen for the guide on or for campus publications in the Philippines?
Yeah.
And
Will it?
right now, no. We feel that, given our position, given the fact that we have the funding, that we don't need we don't need advertisers, we don't need that sort of thing. We don't need to go out of print yet, and print appeals to our audience. So because you can pick it up around campus, so we see the importance of both our media, both print and online.
What do you think about TV?
TV is always going to be there, and much like publications, print publications, it's also trying to find ways to adapt online. It's more accessible readily to everybody. But you know, the Philippines is still predominantly reliant on TV for information. Right?
You like TV news?
Yes.
Why?
So I don't know. It presents the news visually. You get to see everything. It's more like it really appeals to our
If you
generation.
talk about the three networks, do you think what the three networks are showing are news items?
Yes.
Legitimate news items? Yes.
Yeah.
For the most part.
It puts you on the
For the
same
most
page.
part?
For the
It
most
puts you on the
part.
same page as everybody else. Of course, you'd have to do your own research if you want to verify facts that have been said, but more or less, people would absorb immediately what they hear on TV.
Yes.
Do you think TV news is too sensational?
Occasionally, yes. Especially when they're accidents, when there are dead bodies found. Like they tend to interview the man on the street who is entirely like in that moment he is so rattled by the event, and it makes the event seem so, I don't know, scary.
Yeah. And
like more than it becomes more than it is.
Should TV change the way it does news?
Yeah.
Personally, how do you feel about it?
I would remove a lot of the filler stories. A lot of them feel like fillers to me.
I don't have any formal education in journalism, but the way I see it, there seems
You are
to
a
be,
journalist.
Well, yes, by experience, but not. I haven't taken any formal classes on journalism.
You don't have to.
Although I think, sir, that there needs to be better filtering of stories. There are stories that seem to be more pressing and should be imparted to the public. There needs to be a better, or no, it needs to be more conscious for news agencies and media providers that the public should be informed and is shaped by what news they're given or what news is presented to them.
Is your generation interested in news? Yeah?
I think they are, but not in. Our generation seems to be very much interested in getting information and in learning, but not in the
Current
ways.
events?
Actually, current events, as they are made accessible by social media, it's really changed the equation for our generation, because millennials are very active on the internet. They're on Tumblr, they're on Pinterest, they're out for photos, and whatever they see online, it's what shapes their conversation with their friends. It's a concern for our generation, but not in the way that it might have been for previous generations who read the newspaper, who listen to radio, watch TV.
Right.
It's not tri-media anymore that catches the attention of our generation.
Do you find yourself trying to push some stories more than others?
We try for that. Definitely, we want to release the stories which we feel would be very relevant, and if our readership might not be so informed about certain issues, we take extra steps so that they might be informed based on what we, as an editorial board, feel matters. There are stories that are difficult, yes, to digest for readers who might not be acquainted with contexts, but we try to provide that and make it easier for them to understand that this matters for me as a student, this matters for me as a member of this community.
What do you think about the FOI bill?
I feel that it's very important that it's passed because it will make LGUs more accountable and allow media organizations to get the information right away.
John?
It makes governance more participatory, and I'd like to think that our Filipinos today are very much involved in their own brand of governance. That they want to participate in how they're governed. They want to let public officials know that they too are concerned stakeholders, and that how public officials use their resources, the processes that they undergo. These need to be made known to all, and I agree very much that it should be a priority agenda for the 16th Congress.
How do you feel about the last election?
It was very interesting for me. I found that there was an important conversation had among people online, for example, that that the voting was not reflective of who they thought should be elected. So circles online were pushing for certain candidates and were actually bashing other candidates, for example, Nancy Binay. And when that was not reflected in the results, there were all these accusations that, oh, voters are stupid, that's the problem. But we saw how online circles are so closed, and how talking about it online does not change the situation, does not change voter education, for example.
John?
I have similar sentiments on how discussion online seems to have shaped more or less public opinion. How everyone could see the reaction of these opinion leaders who we might find on Facebook. It shaped how people would choose their leaders. But then when the actual results came out, the unofficial results came out, and people were indeed shocked as to the turnout, it seemed to suggest that the fact that public opinion seems to be something separate from what reforms might be needed in voters' education. Online isn't enough. There remains responsibility from government as well as electoral monitoring bodies to not be so complacent about how the system is managed. That there's a long way to go, especially if we look at the elections in comparison to what happened in 2010, especially with regards to the automation. There are a lot of issues that still need to be resolved, and we need to put a lot of attention on that, especially since 2016. It's just 3 years from now. It's going to be the test for our country, I think.
Where do you see your paper 5, 10 years from now?
Maybe 10 years, we'd go all online, I'd say. And we would be doing the same thing. We would try to maintain the same standard of journalism,
all right,
but really push it forward, push the medium to new heights.
Yeah. How about you, John? Where's your paper in 5 years?
Yeah, I think that more or less whatever direction we might take, what's going to be constant is that we try to retain our perspective of presenting issue-oriented articles that make our readers use their own critical thinking, that allows them to form their own judgments and their own opinions about the issues that are presented, regardless of whether or not it might be online or whether we still have print, or whether I don't know, perhaps we could expand to other media like TV or radio. Whatever direction we take, we're going to try to keep our mission intact, because in the end, it's really what made us possible, right?
Yes.
And as a legacy, how would you want to be remembered?
I would like to be remembered as someone who tried to innovate student journalism. Like I said, we've really been trying to see how online media or how can really change the game. For example, we had this one story after the UAP residency rule issue came up.
Right.
We gathered opinions from people on Twitter with a hashtag, and then we compiled all of those on our site, so you can really see like where everybody stands.
How about you, John? How do you want to be remembered?
More or less, for this year, I hope that we might be our editorial board might be remembered for being the one to lead the publication through the transition from being solely a publication that was found on print to one that is more or less systematized in its procedures and its processes when it comes to social media, that we might be able to sustain whatever growth we have had for the past years in terms of social media, and that we might still be able to engage the public in terms of their participation in what we have on Facebook and Twitter, so that the public continues to perceive our paper, our brand as relevant, as a university stakeholder that really is associated with critical thinking and opinions that are issue-oriented.
Apa, John, thanks very much for joining me today.
Thanks very much.
And that's all the time we have for today. Join us again next Thursday for another 360-degree discussion right here at News Cafe. Salamat po.
Whether or not students were apathetic, or if they even actually mattered. Today we can measure it very easily thanks to social media.
Has it changed the way you write?
I think so, yes.
In what way?
It makes well, it has. We have to be more careful as regards fact checking, because because of like Twitter and Facebook, everybody becomes a fact checker, and everybody will point out the flaws in your writing. So I think journalists nowadays are a little more careful.
In terms of subject?
I'd say that we're allowed to be more events-based in our online outlets, because since we can put it out right away, it doesn't become stale.
John, do people read the paper?
Sa bukod, hindi ba nakasalanan ng video?
Media educators and learners called to become press freedom.
This corruption in media won't be reduced to
Good evening. You're watching News Cafe and the Solar News Channel. Joining us today are the editors-in-chief of the top university's official student publications, a fourth-year student of film minoring in philosophy at the Ateneo de Manila University, Apa Agbayani, for the guidance, and also with us a graduating student of...
I'd like to think that people actually read the paper. We have
Yeah, but do you know if they read the paper?
we can measure.
How?
Well, of course, when you walk around campus, you see people reading the paper. People actually notice the differences between what we release online and what we release on print. And they let us know. They send letters, emails, and we're thankful that paper, that our print version still maintains its value despite the onset of online media. We try to make sure that we add value to whatever we release on print, that whatever is online isn't necessarily available for print, so people know what to look forward to.
What's the role of a campus paper?
Well, I'd like to think that the role of a campus paper is to impart information in a balance.
The De La Salle University taking up a BS degree in Applied Corporate Management. John Stephen Batalla for the La Sallian. And joining us are John and Apa. Hi guys, thanks for coming.
Hi.
What's a campus paper like today?
Well, what's interesting about campus journalism nowadays is the entry of social media. And that's not just true for campus journalism, but for journalism in general. And social media allows us to bring out our stories faster and allows our readers to respond very quickly.
Yeah,
How about you,
John?
it makes our assessment of whether or not a reader actually participates and whatever impact we might have on how they think, how they perceive things. Campus media, that broader facet of campus publication, is what makes the playing field for campus journalists very much different as compared to, say, 10 years ago when editorial boards didn't have any idea as to whether or not they actually made an impact, and they would make assumptions as to